When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Dreaming of the Monster. User: RealAnonX74. Posted August 2nd, 1996.
A lot of people say that they'd love to be able to predict the future, but I speak from experience when I say ignorance is bliss. Now, I'm not psychic with the crystal ball and what have you, but I do have dreams that almost always come true. Not all my dreams are like this, you understand. Most of them are the garden variety nonsense you think of when you think of dreams. Familiar locations change slightly, people I vaguely remember from school acting out little plays that are obviously my brain sorting out my day. The dreams that predict things happen way less often, usually when something significant is happening to people I know or someone connected to them. The first example I can remember was dreaming about walking out the front doors of my hometown's courthouse and bumping into a woman named Lynn. Lynn isn't a friend of mine, but she used to work with my wife Corey, and we'd see each other from time to time at functions where spouses were expected to attend. I never felt one way or another about Lynn, which is why I was surprised to see her in what I knew immediately was a dream. Surprise is why we bumped into each other, which knocked loose a bundle of paper she was carrying. Dozens of loose sheets fluttered down to the stone steps, and I immediately apologized, starting to help her collect them. They say you can't read in dreams, but it's never been a problem for me. I won't say I've read whole books while asleep, but I've woken up with firm memories of signs or blocks of text and written them down in a journal in case they ever become useful later. Some of them have, but that's not the story I wanted to tell today. Back to the dream of Lynn and her scattered papers. As I collected the documents off the courthouse steps, I could see they had something to do with the sale of real estate. Lynn, who was in real life a pretty reserved person, was barely holding back tears as I handed the stack back to her. A moment later, I woke up. In the morning, when I told Corey about the dream, she frowned and said that Lynn hadn't been at work in a few days. My wife is a level-headed, no-nonsense business machine when she puts her mind to it, but she also knows the track record of my dreams and trusts them. When I picked her up from work later that day, she said she'd called Lynn and found out that she hadn't been into the office because she was dealing with the sale of her late father's house. As I understand it, she had been eager to keep it in the family, but one of her sisters is perpetually broke and forced the others to either buy her out or put the house on the market. Since Lynn and her siblings already had financial obligations, sale was the only option, and they were pretty broken up about it. Sometimes the dreams are about positive things. About 10 years ago, I dreamed that a woman I'd gone to college with, Susan, was shopping with her mom in the Bon. They were looking at little table and chair sets, bedding, fancy plates, things like that. When I mentioned the dream to Corey, she said they must have been making a gift registry for a wedding, which I hadn't clocked because that part of our wedding was well out of my hands. Sure enough, a month later at Kroger, I ran into Bobby, a mutual friend of mine and Susan's from the old days, and worked the conversation around to where everyone had ended up. Bingo! Susan had just gotten married in Seattle not 2 weeks before. See, it's not all bad stuff. It is, however, mostly bad stuff, and I leavened my story with Susan's wedding because the last dream I want to share is not pleasant. Where I work, we have a lot of middle managers, none of whom really do much aside from gumming things up for people who actually have jobs to do. One of those managers was named Derek, and I cannot possibly communicate how little I like that man. Derek was pretty, venal, and not nearly as smart as he thought he was, but that didn't stop him from making life miserable for anyone who happened to technically rank below him in the org chart. When I started having dreams about Derek being chased around the office by a monster, I was over the moon. I couldn't actually see what was chasing him, I just knew that I loved seeing him run, a look of terror on his usually smug face. As the days and then weeks passed, it got harder to enjoy the dreams because the monster started catching up with him, sometimes right in front of me, and it began to eat him. It started with just one bite on his ass, which was still pretty funny to be fair, but each successive dream became more and more gruesome. Pretty soon, it wasn't just a bite. The thing was eating him like a watermelon, but instead of spitting out seeds, tiny little chunks of bone would squirt into the cubicle walls, each with a soft little pop. Then, the dream stopped. One day, Derek wasn't at work. That single day's absence extended into a week, and everyone was celebrating the extended peace and quiet. The whispers started after he'd been gone a month, little rumors about him not coming back, but no one knew quite why. 3 months in, and our local manager called us into the conference room for an announcement. After 6 months of intensive treatment, Derek had passed from colorectal cancer. Again, he was such a negative presence in the office that most people didn't think twice about him being gone, but it haunted me for a while. Hell, it still does. Not that he's dead, but that in the dreams, I could see his humanity and the terror of his face. Nothing will humanize an enemy quite like seeing them have to face up to death, I guess. The dreams continue, but none of them have featured the monster again, and I really hope it stays that way.
Subject, that'll happen. User, btex2r12. Posted, March 24th, 1996.
There's a stretch of road down in Texas that you could not pay me to drive again. Every lady on Baywatch could pull a dump truck full of money up to my house, and if the whole deal was contingent on me getting anywhere near McMullen County, I'd tell them to keep driving. It's not that I have anything against the people of that fair state or even the countryside itself, but one night, years back, my family was trapped on one of those roads, and the memory has never left me. This would have to have been 1978 because we were driving my grandfather's big 98 LS. The following year, it was totaled when the brakes on a dump truck failed, sending it straight into the George Theriot parking lot where the beautiful old sedan was parked. Grandpa wasn't in the car, thank God, because it'd have crushed him flat. He was sure heartbroken, though, never bought another Oldsmobile again. So, November 1978, and my family was coming back to Houston from Laredo. There's a few ways to make the trip, and since we'd come this way before, we thought it might be fun to change it up a bit. we decided to cut up San Antonio way, which the map said would take us right through Tilden. It's a small town, maybe a couple hundred people, and we figured there'd at least be somewhere to stop for dinner. We were wrong. By the time we got to town, it was only 5 to 5:30 at night, but it may as well have been 3 a.m. for all the people we saw on the street. In fact, the way it all felt, you'd think there wasn't anyone inside the buildings either. There were 2 cafes, both closed, plus a gas station that was just as empty. The shadows were already long when we got to town. After a half hour of hunting around and failing to find a single person, the sun was almost below the horizon. The sandy-colored bricks of the county courthouse were bathed in the fading pink of old Pepto-Bismol, the white columns out front smudged, greasy. The final sliver of sunset seemed to trigger a realization in all of us that this wasn't just a garden variety pain in the ass. Something was wrong in a big way. Collectively, the 4 of us decided dinner could wait the hour and a half to San Antonio. We pulled back in the big silver car and hit the gas, watching the courthouse and then the rest of town recede into the distance behind us. Once the sun had dropped fully below the horizon, it got dark fast. We'd been driving for maybe half an hour, never encountering a single car in either direction or a headlight on the horizon when we saw a sign up ahead in our high beams. It said, "Welcome to Tilden." There was a moment of disorientation, like I'd sat up too fast, and then, sure as God made little green apples, we rolled up on the county courthouse. Dad was driving, Mom in the passenger seat, and she gave him supreme shit for going in circles, even though he insisted he hadn't. She turned on the overhead light and flipped through a few of the maps in the glove box until she found the right one. The crinkling it made as it was unfolded sounded loud, louder than the idling engine. Mom found the road we were on and dragged her finger up, trying to figure out where we'd gone wrong. Once she thought she had sussed it out, she told Dad to drive. Again, the courthouse disappeared behind us, and yes, we came upon it again after 30 minutes of pushing forward in what should have been a straight line. This happened over and over for what felt like hours, ending up with us parked in front of the county courthouse. Its dark front windows looking more and more like eyes with each passing trip. Not only were there no people, there were no lights on. Our headlights were the only illumination, and once we ran out of gas, which was now becoming a real possibility, they'd only last so long. Having moved through arguing, shouting, and ultimately crying, my parents sat in silence, the map spread limply across Mom's knees. We were hungry. We were tired. We were all increasingly sure we would never be leaving this place. Dad turned off the car to conserve what little fuel he could, darkness swarming in. For what had to have been an hour, we sat there, our breathing the only sound. It was so quiet that when an outside noise became faintly audible, it was impossible not to recognize it as another car engine. Soon, the night was split by a pair of headlights coming around a corner off to our left, telling us to stay put. Dad got out of the car, his legs wobbly from sitting for so long. He waved at the newcomers, calling out for help. It looked as if they had originally intended to turn left away from us, but upon seeing Dad, the driver took a wide turn to the right, pulling up alongside. The man who cranked down the driver's side window was clearly drunk, but his face was broad and kind. He asked Dad what the trouble was, and when Dad said we couldn't seem to find our way out of town, the man nodded. "That'll happen," he said. He conferred with the person sitting next to him, who said something I couldn't hear. Then the first man told Dad they'd lead us out of town. All we had to do was follow the headlights. Dad thanked them profusely, then got back into the 98 and turned over the engine. The men pulled a U-turn and headed out along the same road we'd been taking all night. 10 minutes later, in addition to the car ahead of us, we began to see far ahead the lights from other vehicles traveling east to west. Somehow, we'd made it to the highway, driving exactly the same route we did before. The men who led us there didn't even stop to say goodbye. They just pulled another U-turn and went back the way we'd come, leaving us in total disbelief. From there, we made a beeline to the nearest gas station and stayed in the safety of those lights for a good long while. So now you understand why, after making it out of McMullen County, Texas once, I've no intention of going back.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.